Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post with me, Molly Gambhir, our weekly show where we bring you all the updates from the world's most volatile region. Today, we have a slightly different setting for you. We are bringing you the show from our studio. Our top story is about Joe Biden's maiden visit to West Asia. They say a United States president comes of age in West Asia. So Joe Biden's visit is especially crucial. On the agenda have been three main issues: visiting Israel and pushing its integration in the region, visiting West Bank and reinforcing U.S. commitment to the Palestinian cause, and visiting Saudi Arabia to recalibrate ties and some good old crude diplomacy.
Joe Biden has kicked off his West Asia trip with a stop in Israel. The US president was embraced as an old friend on the first leg of his high-stakes trip. Landing at the Ben Gurion airport, it was a moment of nostalgia for the president. This was a country he first visited as a senator over 50 years ago. Greeting him on the tarmac were Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid and President Isaac Herzog. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was also present at the airport.
We'll continue to advance Israel's integration into the region, expand emerging forums and engagement like the new I2U2 summit, which will bring Israel, the United States, the UAE together, and India as well, to deepen our economic cooperation between the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific.
Right after this welcome ceremony, Israel's military showed him its new Iron Beam system. This is an anti-drone laser that Israel says is crucial to countering Iran's aerial vehicles. Tel Aviv hopes the new Iron Beam system will secure its skies. While not yet operational, the military hardware is pegged as a game changer. Presenting such technology to Biden is a strategic move for Israel. In September, Washington approved a $1 billion package for the Iron Dome system.
President Biden to rekindle the eternal flame.
From there, it was a visit to the Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem. Biden rekindled the eternal flame in the Hall of Remembrance, later taking part in a wreath-laying ceremony. He also spoke to 2 Holocaust survivors at the memorial. The next day was jam-packed too. Meetings and new alliances were on the agenda. Joe Biden and Yair Lapid have signed a security pledge in Jerusalem, reaffirming their united front against Iran. The pledge is called the Jerusalem U.S.-Israel Strategic Partnership Joint Declaration. It plans to never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon and plans to address Iran's destabilizing activities in West Asia.
And we'll continue to work with Israel to counter other threats from Iran throughout the region, including support for terrorism, ballistic missile program that continues, and the proliferation of weapons to terrorists and proxies like Hezbollah.
Words will not stop them, Mr. President. Diplomacy will not stop them. The only thing that will stop Iran is knowing that if they continue to develop their nuclear program, the free world will use force. The only way to stop them is to put a credible military threat on the table.
Thank you all so much.
This is a show of unity by allies, long divided over diplomacy with Tehran. The pledge reaffirmed U.S. support for Israel's regional military edge and the Jewish state's ability to defend itself by itself. The United States says it will never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon, adding that it is prepared to use national power to ensure that outcome. Then there was a meeting of a new alliance, the I2U2 grouping, or the West Asian Quad, consisting of Israel, India, United States and the UAE. This was the first leaders' summit of this bloc. It brought together Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US President Joe Biden, and the UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The focus of this summit was joint initiatives, especially in 6 areas: water, energy, transportation, space, health, and food security. This meeting focused on the global food security crisis, one triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The UAE will invest $2 billion to develop integrated food parks across India. This will help bolster production, given India is a major food producer.
Food insecurity. The UAE's investment to develop integrated agricultural parks across India, with the support of the American and Israeli private sector experts, has the potential to sustainably increase India's food yields in the region threefold in just 5 years. India is a major food producer in the world. Think of the beneficial impacts this will have on India's farmers and the people suffering from hunger and malnutrition in the region.
New Delhi will provide appropriate land and facilitate farmers' integration into the food parks. The grouping also focused on clean energy during their meeting. The I2U2 grouping will build a hybrid renewable energy project in Gujarat. This could feed into India's efforts to reach net zero emissions by 2070.
I2U2 ने एक सकारात्मक एजेंडा स्थापित कर लिया है। हमने कई क्षेत्रों में जॉइंट प्रोजेक्ट्स की पहचान की है और उनमें आगे बढ़ने का रोड मैप भी बनाया है। I2U2 फ्रेमवर्क के तहत हम जल, ऊर्जा, परिवहन, स्पेस, स्वास्थ्य और खाद्य सुरक्षा के 6 महत्वपूर्ण क्षेत्रों में जॉइंट इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ाने के लिए सहमत हुए हैं।
For the US, it is all about extending its influence in the region. For Israel, it is about more and more Arab recognition. For the UAE, it is about money and investments. So where does India fit in? Firstly, all of these 3 countries are close Indian partners. Secondly, India has always supported the Abraham Accords. And thirdly, this West Asian Quad could be India's window to the region. From there, it was a short trip to Bethlehem. Biden met Palestine President Mahmoud Abbas. Ahead of the meet, Biden visited a hospital in Jerusalem, where he announced a $100 million aid package for medical institutions. Ironically, Biden's motorcade no longer had Israeli flags on it during this visit. It comes as Washington stresses on its commitment to the 2-state solution.
But we've never give up on the work of peace. You know, there must be a political horizon that the Palestinian people can actually see, or at least feel. We cannot allow the hopelessness to steal away the future.
Regarding the murder of the martyred journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, the murderers need to be held accountable. Because the continuation of all of that will lead to escalation on one hand, and on the other hand, the loss of hope for a better tomorrow.
This brings us to the important part of the trip, Biden's visit to Jeddah. The US president made history by taking a direct flight from Tel Aviv to Jeddah. Riyadh paved the way for Israeli planes to use its airspace by announcing it was lifting restrictions on all carriers. This comes as many believe a Saudi-Israel normalisation could be on the cards soon. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
From Iran to Jordan, we have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, let's take a look at what else is making headlines across West Asia.
Lebanon says Hezbollah has warned of war against Israel if Beirut was not allowed to extract oil and gas from a disputed maritime field. Lebanon is locked in US-mediated negotiations with Israel over a disputed maritime border. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has visited Aleppo and participated in Eid prayers in his first visit to the city since the Syrian war began in 2011. The visit is symbolic as the Syrian government's victory in ancient city marked a turning point in the civil war. Turkish President Erdogan urges Putin to keep Syria aid crossing open. Russia last week vetoed a United Nations proposal to keep the Bab al-Hawa crossing open to get humanitarian aid to Syrian civilians. Sweden has handed a life sentence to an ex-Iranian official over the 1988 purge. Hamid Nouri is convicted of committing war crimes and murder while working as an assistant to the deputy prosecutor. Israel says it will probe 1967 mass grave of Egyptian soldiers. Israeli media reports that dozens of Egyptian soldiers killed in 1967 war are buried under what is now an Israeli tourist park.
Saudi Arabia and Israel may be getting closer with the help of the United States, but this Arab-Israel axis is not the only one that is taking shape here. Next week, Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to head to Iran. On the agenda is a meeting with the leaders. There we have the images coming in of the United States President Joe Biden, who has arrived in Saudi Arabia. It is a moment that has been closely watched from around the world for multiple reasons. First, given the criticism that Joe Biden has received for a U-turn when it comes to meeting the Saudi Crown Prince. His very arrival in Saudi Arabia with that direct flight coming in from Israel to the country has also been significant. This is the first flight ever taken by a U.S. president from Israel to an Arab state, especially since Saudi Arabia and Israel have not normalized ties. This also coming after Riyadh had paved the way for Israeli planes to use its airspace. The body language of the American president will be closely watched. He is already seen shaking hands with multiple leaders throughout his West Asia trip. This is also a shift from the White House decree earlier, which had said that he will not be shaking hands with the leaders following the COVID-19 decree. This visit is crucial, coming at a time when the U.S. has been fighting soaring inflation and oil prices, and that's the reason why Joe Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia carries far-reaching implications. Now, the countries have shared a significant relationship for over 70 years. Saudi Arabia had been a U.S. ally for over 70 years. They had a security for oil relationship, which began about 8 decades ago. But a lot changed under Joe Biden when it comes to the relationship between the two sides. Remember, he had promised that he will be declaring the Saudi Crown Prince a pariah. He vowed that he will be isolating the Saudi Crown Prince. He did not even call Mohammed bin Salman and released intelligence reports on the journalist Jamal Khashoggi's killing, as well as documents looking into Saudi Arabia's connection to the 9/11 attacks. For multiple reasons, this visit is crucial given the criticism that Joe Biden has received following his U-turn in his decision to visit Saudi Arabia and meet the Saudi Crown Prince. U.S. President Joe Biden in Saudi Arabia. For our viewers who might just be tuning in, interesting to note the kind of body language that is on display at the moment. This is a meeting that will see the leader meeting the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He will be holding meetings with the Saudi Arabian King Salman. Now, this particular meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince has been one which has, of course, attracted criticism for the American president for multiple reasons, given that Joe Biden had promised that he will be turning Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Crown Prince, into a pariah. Following the journalist Jamal Khashoggi's killing, he had vowed revenge. But a lot has changed following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and which is why Joe Biden making his way to Saudi Arabia following the rising oil prices, something that he has been tackling back at home. Domestically, this is a visit which will also play out very significantly given the timing, given the criticism that he has received, and given that this comes ahead of the midterm elections. Now, at the start of Joe Biden's trip to West Asia, officials had said that he would be avoiding close contact like shaking hands as a precaution against COVID-19, but clearly he has broken that protocol multiple times already during his West Asia trip, and which is why his body language also when he meets the Saudi Crown Prince for that engagement will be watched very closely. And with that, Joe Biden's meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince has been the key focus of his West Asia tour. Saudi Arabia, like I just said, has been a U.S. ally for over 70 years. The two sides have had a security for oil relationship, which began 8 decades ago with Franklin D. Roosevelt and King Ibn Saud. Now, this relationship lasted through 14 U.S. presidencies until Joe Biden. Under the Biden presidency, a lot changed. He did not call the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He released intelligence reports on Jamal Khashoggi's killing, even documents looking into Saudi Arabia's connection to the 9/11 attacks. And since then, the U.S.-Saudi Arabia relationship has been on the rocks. But with this visit, it looks like Joe Biden is finally ready to make concessions. He was once dismissive of the prince, but now he clearly needs Saudi Arabia on his side. Clearly, this is a major climb down from his campaign promises. Meanwhile, MBS is on the verge of getting what he wants, recognition from the U.S. president. Now, what's in it for Washington? The Russian invasion has clearly changed a lot. The U.S. needs Saudi Arabia for oil again. Riyadh needs Washington for defense and security again. And currently, the U.S. president has a huge domestic liability. Gas prices have been surging in his country, and these are prices that Saudi Arabia could help lower. The Crown Prince is also young. He's likely to lead the kingdom for decades. So a reconciliation had to happen at some point. Reports even suggest Saudi Arabia could announce normalisation during the visit, and Israel normalisation could be Biden's prize for meeting MBS. A relationship with Israel would contribute to greater acceptance of Saudi Arabia. It will bolster MBS's vision to turn the kingdom into a global power. The two countries also share a common enemy in Iran. But despite these signs, it's unlikely that any normalization will happen soon. It's highly improbable that Saudi Arabia will recognize Israel while Biden visits the country or as long as King Salman reigns. This process will likely be long and gradual. First, the economic ties, then security partnership, and finally, the diplomatic recognition. For years now, Saudi Arabia has settled on one position, which is first to implement the two-state solution and then discuss normalization. But over the years, the kingdom's position has seen a shift spearheaded by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The Israel move could, however, be his biggest test so far, but right now, Saudi Arabia seems to be in no hurry.
الخاصين حيث كان الثورة الخاصة
Let's also talk about why the body language of the American president while he is in Saudi Arabia is going to be closely watched. Let's first go back in time and tell you how the earlier visits of the American presidents have panned out. The former Saudi king Abdullah greeted Bush warmly at the airport in May 2008. Abdullah kissed the president on both cheeks in a traditional Arab greeting while a military brass band played the American national anthem. But for Obama in Riyadh, it was a massive downgrade. In 2016, King Salman sent the governor of Riyadh to meet him on the tarmac. Obama's arrival was not even broadcast on state television. And that greeting was a far cry from the reception given to Donald Trump. The 45th United States president chose Saudi Arabia for his first foreign trip in 2017. Saudi rulers lavished the Trump family with gifts, a sword dance, and a flypast of Air Force jets. So what will it be for Joe Biden? A hug, a handshake, or just a fist bump throughout the visit? This is something that will be closely watched. There is also the question of how Joe Biden will be greeting the Saudi Crown Prince when that meeting happens. Biden kicked off his West Asia trip with a carefully choreographed itinerary. He did not want to appear friendly, but he was also there to recalibrate ties. So the White House had an answer for this. It said that Biden will not be shaking hands throughout the trip, and which is why, like I said, his body language is going to be watched very closely throughout this trip in Saudi Arabia. When Biden landed in Israel, it was a fist bump fest. The American president refrained from shaking hands with anyone at first. There were fist bumps for the Israeli president, for the prime minister, and also for the former prime minister, Naftali Bennett. However, he shook hands with Israel's former prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, an old acquaintance who greeted him at the airport. Not just that, when he went to meet the Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, Biden was also seen shaking hands with him. And this puts his White House no handshake decree out of the window already. Now, this makes it awkward for Biden to now suddenly fist bump the Crown Prince when they have that meeting. He has already shaken hands with a few leaders. The world will be watching the body language of the two leaders almost as closely as the statements. And so far, there is no joint press conference that's planned, which means that there are limited photo opportunities throughout this trip that could make the two leaders appear too friendly. But it's hard to say how he will respond if confronted with MBS's outstretched hand. So to shake hands or not throughout that trip and when that meeting happens seems to have become Joe Biden's biggest dilemma in West Asia right now. Let's go straight across now to our correspondent Susan Teherani, who is with us from New York and has been tracking the domestic reactions and the way this visit, Susan, has been playing out domestically for Joe Biden earlier on. Like we were discussing, his body language throughout this trip will be watched out very closely. He has already arrived and received that welcome at the airport, followed by which he will be holding those meetings with King Salman and the Saudi Crown Prince. What are the expectations in the United States right now? What are the reactions so far to this visit?
So we did a few hours back receive a report and news that the President Biden will not be making any announcement regarding oil after his visit to Saudi Arabia. This perhaps is going to be much to the disappointment of some consumers here in the United States, despite being unrealistic expectations on the one hand. On the other hand, many, notably in the Republican Party, are actually viewing this visit as being perhaps a step in the right direction, considering the fact that Saudi Arabia has been an ally for many years. And perhaps, you know, it may take a while, but it's a reset on the one hand. Then there are skeptics that are saying that the Biden administration is not going to be able to turn the table on this relation because it's also at the same time trying to reach a nuclear deal with Iran, one of Saudi Arabia's arch rivals. But the Biden administration also is hoping to sort of mend ties between Israel and the Arab world. And if it really wants to have a continuation of the Abraham Accords signed during the Trump administration, Saudi Arabia is a key player in the Arab world. And it will have to broker some kind of rapprochement and a formal deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So I think he will be carrying a lot of messages from Israel to Saudi Arabia. That's something to look at, and I think that's something to be welcomed as well. But then we also do really have that backdrop of criticism, notably from within his own party, of why the president even decided to go and meet, notably with bin Salman, known as MBS, the prince, after human rights issues CIA reports that he ordered the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are those, again, here saying that he shouldn't be going there at all, even if it is for, security issues as well. So, he has his criticisms on the one hand, but on the other hand, many believe that the Middle East should not be abandoned by the United States either.
And for those reasons, this visit will be closely watched from around the world. We're leaving it there for the moment. Susan, thanks very much for getting us a better sense of the domestic implications of this visit of the American president. With that, we're taking a break at this point. That remains our continuing focus right here on WION World is One. Thanks very much for watching.
One